Hi everyone, thank you very much for bearing with us as we had a few technical issues, and very welcome to the first of our AFP mini-series interviews. My name's Anna. I am a Medics.Academy fellow and the lead for the SDocs programme, which supports first to penultimate year medical students. But the reason why I'm here with you today is because I'm a final year medical student myself, and I'm looking to find out a little bit more about the academic foundation programme. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined tonight by two academic FY1s, Faris and Dimitris. So Faris, would you like to introduce yourself?
He's muted.
So I think Faris might be having a few technical issues. Dimitri, would you like to introduce yourself if you can hear me?
Hello, can you hear me all right? Hello? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. My name is Dimitris Karponis, and I am an academic junior doctor. I started this year, so I'm an F1 in Oxford. I graduated from Imperial College, 6-year program, did a BSc in pharmacology, and many reasons to apply for an AFP. And I cannot see many reasons not to apply for an AFP, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so we'll go through all of that in a minute.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It looks like Faris is still having a few technical issues. Hopefully he'll be able to join us very shortly. But we'll go back to you, Dimitri. So what we're talking about today, just very briefly, is why you chose to do the academic foundation programme instead of the kind of standard foundation programme. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from you a little bit about what made you choose the academic programme.
So the Academic Foundation Program, or AFP for short, comes in all sorts and varieties, but as a general rule, what is different from the standard foundation program is that instead of having different rotations in medicine and surgery, usually during your F2, one of your blocks, these are usually 4-month blocks or 3-month blocks if it's 4 different blocks. So one of those blocks during your F2 year is a research block instead of a clinical sort of rotation. And you get 3 or 4 months as a general rule in most programs, but again, that varies from place to place to do research. And I found that very appealing. And I think it's for a lot of reasons, really. Personally, I was interested in research. I had a taster during medical school and tried a couple of different things and thought, yes, this is what I want to do. This is what I'd like to continue. So the AFP for me is a great opportunity to continue what I did in medical school. It gives you a lot of time. So at the same time, you can start something new and then consider in the future to continue into the academic pathway, where the next would be an academic clinical fellowship as a next step, or a PhD. So that was sort of my journey and my experience so far.
That sounds great. So I guess one question that I have is you get a bit less clinical time, it sounds like, in the academic foundation programme. So what might you say to someone who was interested in maybe doing the academic pathway, but was kind of worried about their clinical skills and making sure they were, at the same level as everyone else by the time they finished, their 2 years in the foundation programme?
That's a very good point. It's one of the concerns that come up most commonly among medical students, because you do get less time in the wards. So I haven't done the F2 myself yet and the research block myself yet, so I cannot go back and evaluate my situation. But what most of my seniors say, and what I think will probably hold true, is that this 4-month block is not a big difference in what you sort of build in the long term, because you go through different specialties. The block coordinators ensure that you go through medicine and surgery, and they ensure that you don't stay behind. Of course, there's safeguards, and there is some pressure to complete all the same sign-offs and all the same things that are required for an F1 during the months that you're given. So you've got a block less to fill everything in. But I think at this stage, it doesn't make any difference. Maybe later on as an ACF or a clinical lecturer, where there's a much bigger academic commitment, then I think this is a very valid point. But this is outside the scope of this discussion, I think.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. That's really useful. I can see that Faris had joined us, but I don't know if he can hear us at all. No, he doesn't. He still doesn't seem to be able to hear us. I'm so sorry, Faris. We definitely wanted to involve you in this discussion. I'm sorry that there's been some technical issues. So something else that I wanted to ask was, I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit already, but how does the academic foundation program kind of fit in with further career goals? So you mentioned about doing something called an academic clinical fellowship afterwards. But, you know, where do you see the sort of academic program leading into?
So I feel like I've only given you the perspective of the research and people who like research, but I think the academic foundation program is a great way to even start your research, even if you're not quite sure if you want to pursue an academic clinical fellowship or what comes on further, which I'll explain in a moment. So it's a great way to see if you like research. You've got some more time to, for personal development, to take courses, to get involved in different research projects. And say you like one of these research projects, then you move on to the next step, which is usually an ACF, the Academic Clinical Fellowship, which you apply after an F2. And you go into core surgical training or IMT, the core medical training program, but you do have more time for your academic commitments. And usually you start something during your F1, F2, and then you continue that as an ACF, and then you can further continue that as a clinical lecturer when you are specializing into your field of interest. Now, an important thing I should mention is that if you do not get an AFP or if you do not get an ACF, you can always join at the next step. So this is the integrated academic clinical pathway. It doesn't mean that you have to start from an AFP to get to the end. You can always go for an ACF directly, or if you don't have an ACF, you can always do a PhD and go for a clinical lecturership directly. So there's a lot of different ways to get in.
That's great. Thank you so much. So when I was thinking about what I wanted to ask you during this discussion, obviously the title of this particular sort of mini interview is why the AFP, but I was kind of thinking, why not the AFP? Like, what might be the things that would stop people from applying for the AFP? Because obviously not everyone does. And I think one of the concerns that's come up amongst the peers that I've spoken to is the kind of extra time it takes to do the applications and do the interviews, and that's often around the time of your medical school finals and the SJT and things like that. So what would you say to people who are kind of on the fence and are worried about the amount of time it's going to take to apply?
Yeah, definitely another good point. I was considering that myself. So I think it depends. It depends on your motivations and on what you have to lose. And I honestly think there is nothing to lose if you go for it. And if you don't go for it, the AFP won't come to you by itself. So I think you should go for it. And worst case scenario, you get some experience through the application process. Now, it is very valid that you do spend some time going through white space questions and preparing for interviews. But I think it acts as an extra safeguard. Say you really want to be in a competitive deanery like London, and you only have the SJT to count on, which is a very random test, and you cannot really prepare for that. A lot of it is on the day performance as well. So an AFP gives you sort of a second chance to be in the area you want to be. Plus, think of it as building something for the future. So the white space questions that you're going to do require a lot of digging in your CV, what you've done before, what kind of person you are. So you realize all those things that you've done before, you collect them, and that helps you, because as an F1 and later in your career, you'll need a portfolio. So you need to have these things grouped up. And of course, the interviews, when you get an interview, are great preparation for ST1 or ST3 interviews that come later on. So I wouldn't think of it as time lost.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dimitri. And I'm sorry that we couldn't hear from Faris because of the technical issues. But if you found this discussion useful today, please join us for the rest of our series, where myself, Dimitri, Faris, and several other academic doctors are going to be talking through some of the other aspects of the application and what might come next after an AFP. So that will be at the same time next week and every week after that for 5 weeks. So please do join us. And yeah, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.